The ballroom was quiet that morning, the kind of hush that only happens before a storm, or before a wedding that's trying too hard to look effortless. I arrived early, not because I needed to, but because I knew I wouldn't be able to relax until I saw everything with my own eyes. Control wasn't just a habit, it was my armor. The seating chart was mounted on a gold easel near the entrance. I scanned through the names, taking in the polished calligraphy, the color-coded family clusters, the meaningless but pretty labels, bride's side, groom's side, VIP, legacy table, and then I noticed it. Vera Wiles wasn't there. My mother, who raised me alone, who helped design half the venue decor, who hemmed my backup dress by hand just last night, wasn't listed anywhere, not at the head tables, not even among the extended family rows. Her name was missing, omitted, as if she hadn't existed long before I became a suitable fiancé. I blinked, checked again. Nothing. I stared so long that a staff member came over to ask if I needed help. I waved them off with a smile that cracked at the edges. Maybe it was a printing mistake, I told myself. A logistical error. Nothing personal, but deep down, I knew. It was deliberate. It was calculated. And it was subtle enough to pass as forgetfulness, which made it worse. During the pre-wedding brunch, one of Lumen's great aunts leaned in with her pearls swinging and said, "So lovely to meet everyone, though I don't believe I saw your mother's name on the planning committee list. Was she more behind the scenes?" I offered a tight smile. "You could say that," she nodded approvingly. "We all have our roles." Roles. That's what they called it when someone like my mother wasn't allowed a seat. I excused myself under the guise of a phone call and stepped out to breathe. Later, I flipped through the wedding program again, hoping to find something redeeming, something small. Maybe a line in the thank you section, a dedication. But under the with gratitude page, it read, "Ronald and Isolde Holmes, for their unwavering guidance, generosity, and love." And below that, in lighter font, as if it were an afterthought, "Pam, retired assistant stylist, heart of gold." Assistant stylist. That's what they decided to call her. She ran her own place out of our kitchen for years, took house calls, did back-to-back double bookings just to pay my tuition. But in this narrative, she was downgraded to an assistant, an accessory, a warm body with scissors. I asked Lumen, "Did you see what they wrote about my mom?" He glanced up from his plate, shrugged. "People don't read those pages. You're overthinking it." Overthinking it. That's what he always said when he didn't want to engage. As if noticing a pattern of quiet erasure was a character flaw. Later that day, while the rest of the bridal party was busy practicing their smile-till-you-cramp poses, I saw Vera being handed her place card. It was handwritten. Unlike the others, which were all embossed with gold edges and calligraphed titles, hers was scribbled in blue ink. No table number. Just Pam. She looked at it, then looked at me, and said with that calm she'd perfected over years of swallowing things whole, "Let's not make a fuss. It's your day." I wanted to scream, but instead, I swallowed the heat in my throat and nodded. That evening, when I sat down to gather myself in the bride's suite, I opened the program one more time, just to be sure. Lumen's parents were listed with titles, Mr. and Mrs. Ronald Holmes, chairs of this, founders of that. Their story got a paragraph. Vera? Just one line. Pam, retired hairstylist, heart of gold. I closed the program slowly, carefully, like it might cut me if I slammed it shut. And for the first time that day, I started to wish she hadn't come at all. After I closed the wedding program, the sting hadn't settled. It just shifted forms. I tucked it under my arm, smiled at a passing guest like nothing was wrong, and made my way toward the garden. It was time for the formal photos. I'd practiced that smile. I knew how to hold it, even when my jaw ached. My heels sank slightly into the lawn as I walked, the grass still damp from the morning's dew. Music played softly from somewhere behind the rows of manicured hedges. Guests milled about in satin and seersucker, their laughter blending into the rustle of cocktail napkins and glassware. Vera stood just off to the side near the hydrangeas, adjusting the hem of her dress. It was the one she had spent 2 nights altering. Discount rack, size too big. Fabric, she said, was resilient, though everyone knew she meant affordable. Her hair, as always, was impeccable. swept up into a bun that could have walked onto a movie set. Lumen's cousin's wife, the one from Atlanta with the unnaturally white teeth, glanced in Vera's direction and leaned in toward me. "Is that polyester?" she asked, half whispering but loud enough. "Did she stitch that herself? That's so homespun." I forced a small laugh, the kind you give when you're trying not to make it worse. "She did," I said, watching Vera wave at someone who clearly hadn't noticed her. "She has magic hands." "Adorable," she said, sipping her rosé. "Very DIY." I didn't respond. My fingers curled into my palm, the warmth creeping up my neck. I scanned the area for Lumen, hoping he hadn't heard. He was over by the photographer, chatting with Isolde and the wedding coordinator. Of course, the photographer clapped once to get everyone's attention. "Let's do bridal family next. Mom, dad, siblings, bride and groom, front and center." Isolde immediately sprang into action, directing people like a pageant coach. She grabbed Lumen's arm and pulled him into place, then ushered his father, her niece, and a few out-of-town relatives onto the stone path. Vera lingered near the back, unsure where to go. I motioned toward her, but Isolde turned to the photographer and said, "That's everyone for this shot." "She's not," I started. "We'll take more later," Lumen whispered, touching my waist, like that made it okay. The camera clicked, then clicked again. We moved through a dozen more shots. Bridesmaids, groomsmen, the couple with the ring bearer who kept picking his nose. Everyone got their moment. Everyone except the woman who once skipped meals so I could take violin lessons I never finished. Later, back inside, one of the photographers handed me a preview booklet. I flipped through quickly, skimming shots. Then I paused. One of the family photos showed me, Lumen, his parents, and the entire Holmes tribe. The framing was perfect. The smiles were glossy, and Vera had been cropped out. And she had been standing just to the right of me, her hand barely touching the bouquet I held. In the printed version, that hand was gone. She was gone. I stared at the image, at the blank space where her face should have been. You couldn't scream about that, not without sounding crazy, not without people calling you emotional, overly sensitive, difficult. You can fight a shove. You can't fight a deletion. Vera caught up with me later by the water station. "You looked beautiful out there," she said, handing me a paper napkin for my lipstick. "They cut you out," I told her, the word stiff. She shrugged. "That's fine. I was never really in the frame." She meant it. That was the worst part. She didn't say it with bitterness or martyrdom, just acceptance, like someone who'd stopped expecting an invitation a long time ago. She excused herself to the restroom. I stood by the back exit alone for a moment, pretending to scroll through my phone, but really replaying everything. The jokes, the sideways glances, the laughter that always came in just a beat too late when Vera spoke. And through it all, Lumen, smiling, joking, shrugging it off like discomfort was a glitch in the software. They didn't need to say she didn't belong. They'd already decided it. Every gesture, every omission, every carefully curated photo op. A voice echoed in my mind, something I once heard at a panel on nonprofit storytelling. Family is not about blood, it's about who stands with you when the room laughs. Vera stood with me every time, and now no one stood with her. I walked slowly back toward the seating area, past the ice sculpture, past the bored band playing standards nobody was dancing to. As I turned the corner, I heard Isolde's voice. Low, too casual to be cruel unless you knew what cruelty sounded like dressed in pearls. "We'll fix that one in post," she said to the photographer. "Don't worry, just background clutter." They called my mother clutter. I smiled, but inside, something snapped. The night before the wedding, I heard her on the phone. I wasn't supposed to. The bedroom door was cracked open, and I had been lying in bed, eyes closed, but not asleep. She stood in the hallway, back to me, voice low and almost apologetic. "Maybe it's better if I don't come," Vera whispered. "I don't want to be a burden to her." She paused. The silence on the other end felt like it was choking her. "She already has enough pressure. I don't want to be a problem she has to explain." I didn't say anything. I could have gotten up, walked into that hallway, and told her what she meant to me, what she had done for me. I could have reassured her that her presence wasn't an inconvenience, but I stayed still, listening like a coward. By cocktail hour the next day, the air was heavy with perfume and the clink of ice and crystal. People gathered in clusters, laughter swelling like a tide. The band played jazz renditions of classic pop songs, and someone was trying too hard to keep the champagne tower from leaning left. Vera, ever the helper, was assisting an older guest who struggled with her walker. She gently guided her to a seat near the hedges, adjusting the hem of the woman's dress, smiling the way she always did when making others comfortable. That's when Lumen's nephew, 6 or 7 years old, walked over, tugging on Vera's sleeve. "Are you one of the cleaners?" he asked. The question fell like a firework into a room of dry paper. A few people chuckled, softly, nervously. Someone muttered, "Kids say the funniest things." Vera smiled gently and touched the boy's shoulder. "No, sweetie," she said, "just helping." But the boy's questions sliced me open in places no adult insult ever could. It wasn't his fault. Kids repeat what they hear, what they absorb. Someone had said something, or said nothing when it mattered. I froze, my glass of Prosecco halfway to my mouth. My jaw tightened, my spine straightened. My eyes darted to Lumen, who saw the exchange and gave me a helpless shrug, like what could you do? That shrug felt like a betrayal. Later, as I stood near the bar, a bridesmaid approached me with a plastic smile and a mimosa. "Your mom's so hands-on," she said, in a tone that was meant to be admiring, but landed like a slap. I love that whole blue-collar vibe, very grounded. I stared at her for a second too long. "It's not a vibe," I said, choosing my words carefully. "It's a survival skill." She blinked, clearly confused, then laughed as if I'd made a joke. I turned away before I could say something I'd regret. The music was louder now. A trumpet blasted out a melody I couldn't place. I needed air. I found Vera sitting near the back, fanning herself with a paper napkin. Her smile returned as soon as she saw me, like a reflex. "You okay?" I asked, sitting beside her. She nodded. "He's just a child. Don't let it ruin your moment." "But it's not just him," I said. "It's what he heard. It's what people think when they look at you." Vera smoothed her skirt, her hands calm. "Sweetheart, I've spent a lifetime hearing what people think without them saying a word. Why do you always forgive what you didn't deserve?" She looked out at the garden. "Because someone has to stay whole in a room full of broken manners." Her grace was infuriating. I walked toward the edge of the garden, trying to collect myself, trying to breathe through the taste of old shame and new anger. I remembered something I'd once heard Maya Angelou say in an interview. "People will forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel." Today, I felt erased by proximity. I didn't wear the shame. I inherited it, borrowed it from the way people flinched when they saw where I came from. The way they smiled at my achievements but refused to acknowledge the woman who made them possible. As dinner neared, I walked back toward the seating chart, pretending to adjust my earring. Vera stood nearby, holding a card in her hand, another handwritten one. Blue ink again, smudged, not even taped down. A server approached. He was young, maybe college age, wearing a vest 2 sizes too big. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I think you're in the wrong seat." Vera smiled at him, folded the card in half, and whispered, "I usually am." She sat down anyway, and for the first time, I didn't want to sit down either. The ballroom had transformed again, lights dimmed, table candles flickering in mirrored holders, violin music weaving through clinks of glass and murmurs of guests finding their seats. This was the moment I had tried to imagine when we started planning the wedding. Everyone gathered, smiling, looking at us like we were the center of something bigger. But all I could think about was a video that no one seemed to remember but me. I slipped away from the main room and made my way down the corridor toward the AV station. The techs were still making adjustments, wires coiled neatly at their feet, monitors glowing with slideshow loops of engagement photos. I cleared my throat, and one of them looked up. "Hey, I just wanted to confirm," I said, trying to sound casual. "The tribute video, for my mother. You received the file?" He scrolled through a list on a clipboard. "Bride's side? No, ma'am. Nothing like that was on our final run sheet. My chest tightened. I emailed it last week. Twice, and again yesterday, through the planner. He shook his head. We played what was approved by Mrs. Holmes. Of course she had final say. I nodded, thanked him, turned away before my face betrayed me. My shoes echoed on the marble as I headed back toward the ballroom, each step colder than the one before. I slipped into my seat just as the lights dimmed further. The MC welcomed everyone, thanked both families, and introduced a short video montage to honor the journey of the bride and groom. My pre-recorded thank you message began playing on the screens flanking the head table. The voice was mine, but the words weren't all there. Gone were the lines about Vera, the phrases I'd rewritten 4 times until they captured exactly what I wanted to say, about how she was my anchor, the reason I'd made it through school, through heartbreaks, through nights with nothing but ramen and late-night study notes. They'd been scrubbed. What played instead was sanitized, vague, a PR script with no soul. Lumen leaned in as the video faded and whispered, "That sounded perfect, classy." I didn't answer. I just looked straight ahead, forcing my face to match the others. Polished, pleased, practiced. Inside, a fuse burned slowly towards something I couldn't name yet. Dinner was served. Plates clinked, silverware tapped ceramic in rhythm. Vera sat 3 tables away, beside a woman who didn't stop talking about home renovation projects. My mother nodded politely, said little, and smiled like someone holding a full glass in a crowded room. Every time I glanced at her, she was either listening or politely repositioning her fork. And I saw it, the slightest tremble. She wasn't angry, she wasn't upset. She was simply holding it in, holding it all. I remembered a quote I saw once. Sometimes the strongest people are the quietest ones at dinner. She'd been strong all her life, and quiet for far too long. I excused myself and walked briskly toward the restroom. I didn't need to cry. I just needed to get away before I started shouting. In the mirror, my reflection stared back like a stranger. Same hair, same dress, same makeup I paid someone to make flawless. But everything behind the eyes had shifted. "What am I allowing to happen?" I whispered. They hadn't just erased my mother from the program. They were editing me too. My voice, my story, my values. Little by little, they were shaping me into someone more acceptable to their world. Someone softer, quieter, less real. And I was letting them. I splashed water on my wrists, patted them dry, and stared one last time. Then I walked back to the ballroom, with my spine straighter than it had been all day. Just as I passed the dessert cart, I caught Isolde mid-laugh with one of the local councilmen. Her champagne flute sparkled as she turned and saw me. She smiled. That slow, controlled, camera-ready smile. "Sometimes less is more, darling," she said. "You'll thank me later." And I almost did. Until I remembered who raised me. The clink of silver against porcelain had settled into a rhythm, the kind that follows polished speeches and half-drained wine glasses. The ballroom was heavy with artificial charm, crystal light reflections bouncing off gowns, laughter pitched just high enough to sound performative. I was barely chewing the bite of chicken on my plate when the MC tapped the mic and said, "Let's welcome the father of the groom for a few words." Arthur stood slowly, napkin folded into a perfect triangle on his plate. He didn't need cue cards. His speeches were memorized like corporate scripts. He raised his glass with the ease of a man used to being heard. "We are gathered tonight not just to witness a union, but to celebrate what makes that union possible," he began, his voice smooth as bourbon. "Legacy, vision, dedication, and, of course, knowing how to pick the right people." People chuckled. He continued, weaving through anecdotes of Lumen's childhood, tales of business strategy that didn't belong in a wedding speech, and veiled references to building from the ground up. I kept my face neutral, my fork paused in midair. Then came the pivot. Some people build empires, some marry into them. A few tables laughed, those who got the joke, or thought they did. And tonight, we raise our glasses to both, the ones who've worked for it, and those lucky enough to join the team. It landed like a brick in my stomach. They weren't even hiding it anymore. My face didn't move, but I could feel the heat crawl up the back of my neck. I glanced at Lumen. He gave a low chuckle and leaned in. "They're teasing. Don't take it personally," he said, like he was brushing lint off my shoulder. And I stared at him, really looked, at the man I was about to legally bind my future to. Not because he said it, but because he didn't flinch when someone else did. And that's when it hit me. If he doesn't wince when they cut me, does that make him the blade? I looked around the room. No one blinked. No one gasped. No one cared, except for Vera. She didn't speak, didn't shift, didn't touch her glass. But her eyes, they didn't look at Arthur. They looked at me. And her mouth tightened into a line I'd seen once before, when a man once offered to pay her less because he assumed she didn't have a license anyway. The silence screamed louder than applause. I stood slowly, muttered something about needing air, and walked toward the double doors that led to the balcony. The night air slapped me, welcomed me. Finally, something real. I pressed both palms against the iron railing, fighting to keep my breathing steady. Lumen followed, of course. He always showed up when it was convenient, like he wanted credit for proximity. "You okay?" he asked. "Do you think I'm lucky to be here?" I didn't look at him when I said it. "Babe, they love you. It's just their style." I turned to him. "Their style is disdain poured into champagne flutes." He chuckled like I'd made a clever quip. "They're old money. That's how they joke." "No," I said, low. "That's how they see me. As a story they can control, a symbol to decorate their narrative. I'm not part of the family. I'm the punchline." He opened his mouth, then closed it. And that pause told me everything I hadn't wanted to know. When we walked back inside, trying to blend again with the crowd, someone behind me murmured, "She's holding up well, for someone with no skin in the game." I stopped, held my glass mid-air, and stared into the golden liquid, my reflection warped by crystal and circumstance. If I had no skin in the game, why was I the only one bleeding? The ballroom lights dimmed again, this time with a sense of orchestration that felt less like romance and more like choreography. A hush spread, the kind that tells people to prepare for applause even before they know why. The MC smiled into the microphone with polished charm. "Before we transition into dessert and dancing, we'd like to take a moment to honor the generosity and vision behind tonight's unforgettable celebration." I felt Lumen shift slightly beside me. He didn't look at me. That was how I knew something was coming. A video began to play across the twin projection screens. A slow montage of floral arrangements, customized signage, glass candle holders glinting beneath the chandeliers. The voiceover spoke of timeless elegance, heritage, and design brilliance. It was my work. Every piece. From the layout sketches I'd scribbled on napkins during conference calls to the long nights spent in vendor spreadsheets, negotiating line items down to the centime. The vision had been mine, but none of that was mentioned. When the video ended, the room clapped with curated enthusiasm as the MC lifted a velvet cloth from a silver plaque. The inscription read, "With deepest thanks to Ronald and Isolde Holmes, the heart behind this vision." The applause grew louder. Lumen finally turned to me, like a man offering a Band-Aid to someone bleeding from the chest. "You helped," he said gently. "They just handled the bulk of it." He meant the checkbook. But the checkbook hadn't picked the candle scent or the hand-lettered menus. It hadn't stood in that freezing rental warehouse choosing linens that wouldn't clash with the table runners. "They didn't steal credit," I whispered, voice low enough only he could hear. "They erased ownership." He didn't answer. As the clapping died down, Lumen's Aunt Callista leaned across the table toward another guest. Her voice wasn't hushed. "Seraphine's come so far, hasn't she?" From modest beginnings to Charleston glamour, a real transformation, proof that charity isn't always wasted. I felt the air around me still. Her words hit not just my pride, but something deeper. Like I had been carved out, sculpted, then handed back to the world as a polished artifact of their making. At the dessert table, I heard another whisper. "They cleaned her up nicely, from community housing to high society. Now that's what I call a project." A project. That's what I had become. Not a person, A makeover story with a nice arc and soft edges. Something they could take credit for without ever breaking a sweat. I stood, excused myself, and walked toward the garden, past the photo wall I had designed, under the arch I'd built with my own hands because the original vendor's quote had been obscene. My heels pressed into the damp ground, but I didn't care. I stood behind the arch, hidden from the view of the party, and stared up at the canopy of lights. They called this a celebration, but I was being slowly buried under their gratitude. My phone buzzed. I opened it, typed quickly. Message to Kara, my assistant. Subject, urgent. Check asset registry on Holmes Urban East project. Cross-reference naming rights and design credit filings. Tonight. I hit send. My hands trembled, not from sadness, but from something else entirely. Clarity. A breeze moved the arch draping, and for a second, I could hear the ballroom again, muffled toasts, laughter, the clink of fresh glasses being filled. Then Isolde's voice rang clear, as if delivered just for me. To family, to legacy, to knowing one's place. I knew my place now. It wasn't next to them. It was above them. The applause was polite and practiced as Ronald stepped up to the microphone. The clatter of dessert forks softened, champagne glasses paused mid-air. The stage lights caught the gold thread in his tie, and he adjusted the mic with the comfort of a man who had done this 100 times before. Thank you, everyone, he began, voice smooth like buttered bourbon. It's always humbling to see so many people gathered, not just for celebration, but for the acknowledgement of progress, of perseverance. I kept my gaze fixed on the centerpiece, a cascade of white orchids I had arranged myself, now lit too brightly. This is America, Ronald continued, where someone can rise from scissors and perm rods to, well, this. He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. His eyes drifted ever so slightly toward Vera. A ripple of laughter threaded through the room, polite, complicit, rehearsed, the kind of laugh people let out when they're not sure if it's okay not to. My fingers gripped the edge of the tablecloth. Vera sat 2 tables away, a gentle smile on her face, napkin folded neatly in her lap. But I saw it, her hand tightening just slightly around her fork. They clapped for cruelty, I thought, and called it class. Lumen leaned in, voice low but casual. It's meant to be funny. Don't ruin the mood. I turned to him, slow and steady. You think that was a joke? He blinked. It was a compliment. I didn't answer. I didn't trust myself to. When the toasts ended, I reached across the table and asked for one of the extra wedding programs. I flipped it open, page by page. Ronald had a full bio. Isolde's resume read like a press release. Foundations, committees, honorary titles. Their parents had footnotes. And Vera, one line, Pamela, retired hair artist. Heart of gold. Heart of gold. That's how they described women like her, as if kindness was her only credential. As if years of sacrifice, skill, and survival were reduced to a tagline fit for a Hallmark mug. She wasn't invited into your world, I whispered to myself. She was tolerated. I stood up. My clutch was still under my chair. I reached down, picked it up, smoothed my dress, and walked past the dessert cart without looking back. A man standing near the coffee bar, someone I'd met briefly during the engagement dinner, turned to his companion and said, "You can tell who came from greatness and who was lucky to get the invite." I didn't break stride. I reached Vera's table and leaned in close. "You ready to go?" She looked up, surprised, concerned. "Sweetheart, I'm not leaving the party," I said quietly. "I'm leaving the performance." I could feel the shift as I turned. The air behind me bent with whispers, the energy rippled like a curtain lifting. Lumen stood instinctively, like he always did when he thought he should. I looked at him. Just once. That was all it took. He didn't follow. The parking lot was quiet, aside from the distant hum of valet shuffling cars and the soft click of my heels against the pavement. Vera walked beside me, not saying a word. She didn't need to. Neither of us had spoken since we stood up from that table. No goodbyes, no apologies, no dramatic exit. Just movement. Just intention. Behind us, the ballroom still buzzed with laughter. the final round of wine-fueled toasts echoing against the high ceilings. A few guests noticed us slipping away. Someone snapped a photo. Another whispered, "Is the bride leaving?" Yes, she was. As we stepped into the hotel lobby, the silence expanded. My heels, once chosen to match the shimmer of the reception lighting, now felt absurd. I slipped them off at the door, holding them in one hand like a trophy of endurance. My toes welcomed the cold tile beneath them. A reset. We took the elevator to my suite. Neither of us turned on the lights when we entered. The room was still, dim, the only illumination coming from the Charleston skyline beyond the window. I sat on the edge of the bed, reached for my left hand, and slowly removed the ring. I'd always known it didn't quite fit right, too loose at the knuckle, too tight at the base, but I hadn't said anything. I'd convinced myself it was fine. I was used to adjusting. I turned it over in my fingers, catching a faint engraving inside the band. Not my name, not even close. It wasn't for me. It never had been. Vera, sitting across from me, saw my hand pause mid-air. It was hers, I said. The sister who didn't live long enough to disappoint them. Her eyes softened with a kind of grief that had no clean edges. They buried her with expectations. You just didn't fit her mold. I nodded. I wasn't a replacement. I was a placeholder. The silence between us wasn't heavy. It was liberating. I stood, walked to the desk, and opened my laptop. "Do you want to take off the dress first?" Vera asked, voice low but calm. "Not yet." I logged into my secure files, opened the folder labeled Foundation, and clicked through layers of legal documentation I'd been assembling for months. The screen glowed with contracts, holding companies, and voting rights breakdowns. I opened my email, typed a message to my attorney. Subject, formal board meeting request. Please trigger the voting restructure per the attached schedule. All filings and ownership transfers are confirmed. Proceed as planned. I hit send. Vera stood quietly by the window. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because this wasn't going to be a rebellion," I said, turning to her. "It was going to be a restructure." I poured myself a glass of water, sat down again, and started drafting a statement for internal circulation. The company's senior partners would be copied. The legal language was cold, but that was the point. They had edited me out of my own life. Now I was editing the story back. Instead of cake and dancing, I forwarded merger documents and texted Kara, my assistant. Confirm final transfer with registrar. Also verify Home's East project design credits. We're correcting the attribution. Then I stared at the ring one last time before placing it inside the drawer. "Some brides toss bouquets," I whispered. "Others toss legacies." Vera smiled from across the room, pride stitched into every line of her face. She didn't say, "I'm proud of you." She didn't need to. I could feel it in the quiet, in the way she finally let herself sit without bracing. The clock on my laptop ticked over, 2:13 a.m. My phone buzzed once. Message from Kara. Ownership confirmation received. You now hold 52% controlling interest. Tomorrow, I wasn't walking into a marriage. I was walking into a takeover. I arrived 10 minutes early. That was intentional. Not because I needed extra time to prepare. I'd already prepared. I arrived early because I wanted to be the one waiting, not the one waited on. It set the tone. The Holmes Corporation building stood stoic as ever, glass, steel, and a lineage that thought of itself as unshakable. I walked in wearing a charcoal pantsuit, hair pulled back, makeup restrained. No lace, no satin, no veil. The bride had left the building. This was war now, and I was dressed for it. The receptionist's expression flickered. She recognized me, wasn't sure whether to smile or panic. I kept walking. On the top floor, outside the boardroom, the door was ajar. I heard murmurs inside. Isolde's voice, crisp, polished, sliced through the space. "Let's keep this brief," she told someone. "She should feel lucky to even be here." I smiled. That was the last time luck would be mentioned in my story. When I entered, the room went silent. Ronald sat at the head, as always, with Lumen 2 seats down, fidgeting with his watch. Isolde had her notepad open, already poised for a narrative she assumed she controlled. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly unaware of the shift that had already happened. I walked to the chair opposite Ronald and pulled out a slim folder. No theatrics, no drama, just math. I'd like to begin by reviewing recent voting shares, I said, voice calm but assertive. As of this morning, ownership structure has changed. Ronald leaned forward. What is this? I laid out the documentation, legal filings, transfer authorizations, proxy declarations, weeks of silent movement now brought into daylight. As of 9:00 a.m. today, I said, I hold 52% of voting rights. Effective immediately, we'll begin restructuring the board. Isolde froze, her pen mid-air. Ronald's voice rose. This is absurd. You're just a girl who tagged along. You think you can sit here and... I was your presentation slide, I cut in. Now I'm your shareholder. Lumen still hadn't spoken. He stared at the documents like they might rearrange themselves if he blinked hard enough. Isolde found her voice, soft and poisoned. We welcomed you like family. I met her eyes. No, you welcomed me like a tax write-off, a feel-good story to put on your holiday cards. But I wasn't a guest. I was the engine. The room was quiet, except for the faint tick of the conference wall clock. Flashback. 6 months earlier. Me, in a downtown cafe with Kara, my assistant, her laptop open, mine full of spreadsheets. I had said it then. Start watching the minor shareholders, the ones they ignore. I want quiet buy-ins. Slowly, no noise. I hadn't planned to use it. I hoped I wouldn't have to. But hope is a luxury. I'd learned that in rooms like this. I looked around the table. This isn't revenge, it's redirection. And unlike your legacy, I built mine myself. Ronald slammed his hand on the table, the sound jarring. You'll destroy everything we built. I didn't flinch. Then you should have built it better. Isolde stood up as I gathered my papers. You'll regret this. I paused, looking over my shoulder. Regret requires attachment, I said. I burned that with the bouquet I never got to throw. And just like that, the woman they mocked walked out owning their legacy. It started slowly. It always does. One article, buried in the business section of the local paper. Unexpected boardroom shakeup at Holmes Corp. Then came another, this time in a regional outlet, headlined, Real Estate Royalty Rattled by Internal Power Shift. They didn't mention my name at first, just referred to me as the new majority stakeholder, as if I had arrived by mail. But then the video leaked. A staffer, anonymous, according to the byline, leaked a short clip from the reception. It showed Isolde leaning over to a hotel coordinator and saying, with a smile as smooth as her pearls, "She's sweet, but keep her mother away from the VIP section. It's not the image we're trying to promote tonight." That was all it took. Within 24 hours, Holmes Corp's social media pages were flooded. Comments beneath glossy architectural renderings read, "This is how you treat the mother of the bride? She raised your CEO. Heart of gold doesn't buy silence." A clip that had once made my stomach turn was now ammunition. I didn't ask for it to be leaked, but I didn't stop it either. I met with Kara that afternoon in my new office, across town, smaller, stripped of velvet couches and brand symbolism. She pulled up a folder marked Recovered. "This was in the trash folder," she said. "Server records show it was deleted 3 hours before your wedding started." She hit play. My tribute video to Vera, the one I'd written and edited late into the night, played in full. My voice, warm, uncut, spoke of childhood, resilience, and one woman who held it all together with a comb, courage, and coffee on sale. We uploaded it to the firm's website with a single line of caption. They deleted this, I didn't. It wasn't for revenge, it was context. The next week, the real consequences began. Isolde quietly stepped down from 3 advisory boards. One board member publicly stated that the optics were no longer aligned with the values we represent. Ronald stopped appearing at events altogether. Rumors of misused funds circled like hawks. Investors began asking questions they should have asked years ago. Lumen vanished from public view. He stopped posting, stopped calling, stopped being seen. A mutual friend told me he was processing. I had no energy left for that word. I got an email one morning. No name, no signature. Just a tip. They tried to hide more than a video. You should look into the East Side development filings. I forwarded it to legal. Meanwhile, my world expanded. Urban Bloom's old staff started filtering into the new office. They brought plants in mismatched pots, their dogs on leashes, and ideas that didn't need to be filtered through an image consultant. The place smelled like ambition and microwaved soup. It felt like mine. I wrote an op-ed for the local paper. I called it, "To Those Who Said I Should Feel Lucky." I ended with, "Luck is what people call it when they're too proud to admit you earned it." That quote got shared more than the article itself. It found its way onto a mural downtown. Someone stenciled it under the overpass near my high school. The week had been long, fulfilling, but long. That night I sat in my office, lights dimmed, the city humming softly below. My inbox had quieted, most of the fires were out. My fingers hovered over the touchpad, ready to shut the screen, call it done for the night. Then I saw it, one subject line standing out in bold. "If you'll just hear me out." Lumen. I stared at it. My cursor moved toward the trash icon, paused, then hovered back. I wasn't sure if I wanted closure, but I clicked anyway. The morning sunlight crept through the blinds of my office, drawing pale lines across the floor. I stared at my laptop screen, the inbox open but untouched, cursor blinking over the newest message. The subject line read, "If you'll just hear me out." It was from Lumen, again. The body of the message was long, paragraphs of explanations, reflections, and something he probably thought resembled humility. It read like someone had swallowed a thesaurus on regret and coughed it up in bullet points. "You changed everything," he wrote. "I didn't know what I didn't know. I thought I was protecting you. But maybe I was just protecting what I thought you should be." I hovered over the reply button, then over delete. I chose neither. Just marked it unread and closed the tab. Not every story needs a second ending. I met Vera that afternoon at a small cafe in the Bronx. It was the place where we used to split one muffin and 2 cups of coffee, back when my textbooks were secondhand and she'd keep working 3 clients past her shift to make rent. The booth by the window was still crooked. The waitress still remembered our orders. "I didn't want to fight that night," Vera said as she stirred her coffee slowly. "At the wedding, I just wanted you to shine." "You've always been the light," I told her. "I just carried the reflection." She blinked a few times and looked out the window. Neither of us needed tissues. We weren't falling apart. We were just finally breathing. The week had been a blur. Articles, messages, interviews I politely declined. Some people called what happened a scandal. Others called it a reckoning. I didn't call it anything. I was too busy building something better. Back home, I packed what was left of the wedding. The dress stayed in its case. The ring had already been returned. The wedding album never made it out of the photographer's queue. I put the unused guest book into a storage bin with no label. Sometimes the best revenge is no revenge at all, just living better. When the invitation from the mayor's office came, I almost didn't accept. But something about the phrasing, a celebration of community revitalization led by local women leaders, made me pause. The event was held in a restored auditorium downtown. It used to be a condemned theater. I knew because I helped write the proposal that got it funding. The irony wasn't lost on me. My speech was simple. I didn't tell my story because the room already knew it. I just said, "You don't owe anyone a seat at your table just because they built the furniture, especially if they never invited you to sit before." The applause was soft, then strong. I caught eyes across the crowd, women, older men, a teenager in the back with her arms crossed and her chin raised just enough to say, "I get it." Later that day, Vera and I stopped at a bulletin board outside the same cafe. Flyers for everything from dance lessons to community legal clinics were pinned across a corkboard the size of a door. Vera paused, pointed at one in the corner. "Urban Core," it read. "Now hiring, Diversity Leadership Initiative." She smiled. "They're scrambling." I grinned. "And we're just getting started." The ballroom this time didn't smell of roses and old money. It smelled of reclaimed space, of resilience, of a city trying to become better than its past, and people determined to build something without waiting for permission. This wasn't a wedding venue tonight. This was the Urban Renewal Gala, And I wasn't here as someone's plus one or afterthought. I was the keynote speaker. I stepped onto the stage in a tailored navy jumpsuit. No train, no corset, no pearls choking my neck. Just me, the real me. The version that didn't ask to belong. The version that knew she already did. I took the mic, adjusted it to my height, and let the silence stretch, just long enough for them to realize I was not about to play polite. When cities are built, I began, it's always the same voices in the room, the ones who inherited the blueprints and the tables they sit at, and yet somehow they keep forgetting who lays the bricks. I saw Ronald shift in his seat, front row. Isolde sat next to him, jaw clenched, clutching a flute of champagne like it could rescue her from the moment. Behind them, Lumen stared at the floor. I kept going. We talk about legacy like it's something we pass down through title deeds and monogrammed china. But the best kind of legacy is the one that can't be stolen, the kind that isn't tied to nameplates or edited programs. I paused, let my gaze drift over the room, past city officials, architects, nonprofit directors, and finally to the people who once toasted my erasure. I didn't need a seat at your table, I said, my voice steady. I built my own. The applause didn't start all at once. It started with one person, someone in the back, then another, and then the whole room stood. Except for them. The family I once tried to marry into stayed seated, statues carved out of pride and regret. After the event, I didn't linger. The photos, the handshakes, the media bites, they all blurred. I had somewhere else to be. That night, I hosted a small dinner for my team. My people. The ones who stayed up reviewing proposals, who showed up when it rained, who never asked me to shrink. The ones who didn't care about last names, but remembered birthdays. We gathered in the back room of a local restaurant, walls lined with books and mismatched chairs. When dessert came out, it wasn't a tiered cake or anything with fondant. It was simple, round, and handmade, with one sentence piped in chocolate. I wasn't a freeloader. I was the founder. There was laughter, a few teary eyes,